Right, so before we get going with trusses, I just want to mention a few more things about this idea of generating a list of objects. So we've generated lists of numbers using series and range. We've generated lists of points by plugging in multiple values for their x and y and z coordinates. What you understand is maybe a lot of what we are doing here is just managing a bunch of lists of information. And so with managing that, sometimes you need to do certain things to these lists. First we'll talk about the tool called shift list, where we can shift certain items of a list around to the back of the list. It says icon here that's highlighted green. So for most of these tools that I'll talk about in this video, I'm in the sets tab and in the list set of tools here. And so the first one I just mentioned, shift list. Okay, let's see what that looks like. First of all, I've used the series widget to create a list of numbers. Starting at 1, stepping by 1 each time, 8 times. And so that behaves very predictably. I get a list of numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And so if I also pass that list of numbers to the shift widget, and I shift the list by 1, which I have right here plugged in for the shift offset, then what happens is it takes that first value and it pulls it to the back of the list, and then all the other items in the list shift upwards. So now the first item is 2, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then that first item from the list is now at the back 1. Of course, if I change the shift factor to 2, right, then the first 2 items get shifted to the back of the list. So the list starts with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 1 and 2. Right, and so on and on and on as I start to shift the list further and further, right, I can begin to reconfigure the information in particular ways, right. We'll actually use the shift list tool as we start to make cross-bracing and cross-webbing for our truss. So I think this will actually make more sense when we actually talk about our truss making recipe here in a little bit. I have another sort of set of ways to begin to change this list. Again, I have series. I've started at 0 and a step size of 1. In this case, I'm doing it 10 times. And so I have a list of numbers starting at 0, ending at 9. And here's another thing we can do with a list. We can reverse the order of a list. And so that does exactly what it would suggest, right? We take this list and we reverse its order. So the last item in the list becomes the first item in the list becomes the last, and everything follows suit in between. Okay, so now it's steps down, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. Sometimes it comes in handy, right? If you wanted the highest value or the lowest value, you just want to pull out the first item in the list, you can reverse the list in order to make sure that you have the one you need. I can also just be very specific about which item in the list I want to pull out, right? Maybe I just want to pull out one item in the list. In this case, with an index of 4, I'm pulling out the 5th item in the list. It's kind of interesting. If you can see, here's the original list again in green. Okay, and so I can pull out the nth item, and now it's just asking for which item do you want to pull out. I'd say I give it an item of 4. Remember, because computers start counting at 0, right? So the first item on my list is 0, and the second item is 1, and this third item is 2, and the fourth item is 3, right? So over here, when you see a list of objects, you'll see this sort of numbered list, like this sort of like bullet points, bullet numbers in Word. But instead of starting with first and second and third, it starts with 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's a little confusing. Again, our computers work just a little differently than how our brains think. And so, right now I've pulled out one item. So that item, well, there's only one item, so it's numbered 0. And it happens to be number 4. So if I go to the index of 4, right, you can see that it pulled out the number 4, literally. And now it's pulled that out as its own list. If I wanted the first object, I could set this to 0, and then suddenly I get 0, so on and so forth, right? So we can reverse the order of a list. We can pull out just one specific item from a list, right? Another thing we can do is pull out maybe not just one specific item, but one piece of the list, right? So in this case, I can give it a range, like let's say the third item to the fifth item, right? And everything between the index of 2 and 4, right? And so I plug in this list, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 9. And here I've plugged in this interval, right? This domain from 2 to 4. And so it's plugged out, it's pulled out items 2, 3, and 4 for me. Okay. So I encourage you to open up this file and take a look. I've made all of the inputs slide bars, so you can begin to play around to sort of see how this thing, what it's actually doing, right, for yourself. So I highly recommend that after this video you pull open this example file and you adjust these things and sort of take a look at what it's doing as you begin to adjust the parameters. There's one more here that I thought was going to be kind of fun. Sometimes there's other ways to sort things. And so there's a number of different things happening in this. So let's just take a quick look, right? But I've drawn a curve in Rhino, and I've brought that curve into Rhino and referenced it into Grasshopper. Okay. I went to the Params tab and the geometry and found the curve widget. Okay. I right-clicked on that and said set one curve and was able to select the curve in Rhino. So that's already been done. And I'm going to evaluate that curve at a t parameter, right, which I've done. And what that does is that creates a point along the curve at this point 0, right? So I've set the t parameter to 0, and so I've created a point here at the beginning of the curve. Okay. Meanwhile, elsewhere, I've used the random number generator, and I've generated 200 random numbers, and I've generated a different list of 200 random numbers, and I plug those in for x and y values. So I've generated a list of 200 randomly placed points. And so you can see those. I'll select them right here, right? They're all turned green right now. Then, this is an interesting tool. It lets us find the closest points to within it. So here it goes. We try to find the closest 10 points to some sort of target point, all right? And so what I've done is I've set my point along this curve as my target point, okay? And then these random points as the sort of cloud of points to search through and then sort through, okay? And then I'm telling it to find the 10 closest points from this set to this point, okay? And so what I've done is then it pulls out those 10 closest points, and I've drawn a line between my target point and the 10 closest points, okay? And so you can see those lines drawn here. They're in green, right? And so these must be the 10 closest points to this point. And so I've drawn a line between them. Okay. The reason I'm doing this is just because I want you to sort of see, right, as I change the value of this point or change the location of this point, then the 10 closest points in this whole set of random points that I've generated changes over time. And so I wanted you guys to be able to see that. And so this is one of those fun things where normally you would just say, oh, okay, well, that's great. It just must be like sampling the 10 closest points. But we can actually draw that. You can see this as a sort of a spider crawling through space, right? So as this green point, its location changes, right? Right. We're trying to measure the distance between this point and this big cloud of random points that we've made. And then this tool pulls out the 10 closest points and then draws a line connecting our target point and those 10 closest points. Okay, and so it's kind of weird, but at the same time, it's one of those things where we can sort of render this change in data in real time so we can sort of visualize it. Okay, so again, there's more than one way to do this stuff, but oftentimes, again, like I said, we're generating a lot of information and lists of objects and things like that, and those lists of objects that we generate then become the starting ingredients for the next step in our recipes, right? And so it's really all about managing this data, and that becomes really important. So these are some of the ways, some of the really common ways that sometimes we have to reconfigure or rearrange some of these lists of data that we generate. Okay, we'll start to put some of these to use in the next exercises where we start to generate trusses.